Hi, Greg.
Hello, Hugh.
This is our August 1st supermoon video. The moon is in Aquarius, headed for Pisces. I'm glad it's in Aquarius because I'm an Aquarian. Actually, I'm a Cancer with an Aquarian descendant. And I don't like Pisces people. Pisces people always rape my wives. August 1st, supermoon.
Well, shouldn't the supermoon mean that the power of the moon is more magnanimous this month?
I don't know.
Maybe it'll amplify our search and quest for justice.
I really don't know. I'm just a Cancer person. I don't know.
Were
About,
those your crab claws?
yeah, crab. And I have an Aquarian in my 11th house, sitting there waiting. So this is an Aquarian supermoon, and it's so funny that um, I'm the truth of Jimmy Hoffa's murder, and nobody interviews me. Don't you find that amusing?
Well, especially since you were detained even before Chucky O'Brien.
Yeah, in my driveway in Troy, Michigan, surrounded by FBI agents with their guns drawn, right in front of my children, as I returned in my work truck from Detroit. But nobody ever interviewed me. And I don't exist in any news.
Yeah, everybody wants a conspiracy theory, but good heavens, I mean, how much bigger of a
You
you
know,
know,
you
the
know
fake conspiracies all actually get out there. They're Alex
when Jimmy
Jones. It's the truth
Hoffa
that never gets out there.
when Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, Whitey had sold me a car, and Whitey was introduced to me um, by the Westhouse family,
Mm-hmm.
who was with Hoffa when he disappeared. I was married to Westhouse's daughter, and I had asked them to stop dealing drugs several times. They were buying all the drugs for the outlaws and the renegades, the biker gangs,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't need to be doing that. And back in the 60s and 70s, I could have went to jail for life. They were putting pounds of marijuana in the back of my car while I worked. So I asked her several times to stop dealing drugs, and then they started trying to kill me. So I divorced her.
Mm-hmm.
But that Westhouse family introduced me to Whitey, who sold me a car. And as I left the dealership, the transmission fell out of it. So I junked it. And then the FBI tried to tell me I buried Hoffa in his car, in Whitey's car. Um, it was really funny. This is how many years ago? 48 years ago?
76.
So that's
1976.
4 would be 80, and then 20, 44, 45
47,
years ago.
something like that.
Yeah. And I'm not in any book, never mentioned. If I call into a radio show, they laugh at me and pretend like I'm stupid or something.
Mm-hmm.
And this is real events in my life.
Yeah.
My horse disappeared on the same day Jimmy Hoffa did. And my horse and the goat, they both disappeared, and they already had a hole dug for him when he disappeared. And I don't think these things, I live these things.
It's like there was an occult ritual that had to do with burying him.
Well, my wife was a witch,
Mm-hmm.
and probably her mother and father were too.
And today I'm noticing that almost every woman you see on the internet likes to claim she's a witch, and I don't know how many how many of them actually practice, but I have noticed that an awful lot of murders seem to definitely coincide with pagan celebrations and with astrological events and so forth,
Yeah,
including full moons.
they like sacrificing kids like they did to my twin in '57.
Hmm.
They kidnapped me and my twin with Camille Sirhan in 1957. Camille Sirhan married my cousin who was born on July 4th, just like me. I'll bet you she thought my cousin was me because I hugged her in kindergarten when she showed up from California with my twin. And then my twin was murdered that night. And witches had kidnapped me prior to that.
Yeah, it's one of your earliest memories of
Witches, yeah.
witches
Uh,
surrounding you.
they had me in a cauldron with, and they had a fire underneath me, and they wouldn't allow me to talk or scream out. And that was one of the first memories of my life.
Hmm.
And then I married a girl, and she told me she was a witch a year later. Her mother's name was Florence. Her last name was Florence, like Florence, Italy. And she was with Jimmy Hoffa at the Sly Fox as he disappeared. And the FBI tells everybody that the mafia killed Hoffa. I don't know how much more mafia you can be than have your last name named after an Italian city. Do you?
Right. Yeah, Florence, Italy. Right.
But I never mentioned, and they surrounded my truck in my Troy, Michigan driveway.
So that was Louise's maiden name was
A couple of
Florence, right?
hours after Hoffa disappeared with Louise Florence,
Hmm.
and her state policeman ex-husband already had a hole dug in New Haven, Michigan. And the day he disappeared, that hole was filled in. My horse disappeared. A goat disappeared. Hoffa disappeared. I never saw my horse again. And gee, I was in his Teamsters union, and Hoffa's my family member.
Right.
So it's real interesting how when I call into places like Coast to Coast or any news station, they just ignore me.
Hmm.
And then Anthony Tocco, and the FBI says they found a spot of blood in a house Miller owned, and I bought Miller the house. Miller and Tocco both worked with me and for me. I did all the Sears warranty work. I even put the furnace in Tony Tocco's home, met his wife and children, but I never exist anywhere.
And yet, for some reason, after that, they're no, they must definitely know that they had no part to do with Hoffa's murder, and yet they're trying to somehow
Yeah,
take
Tony
credit
Tocco and
for
Miller
this in
worked
some
with
way.
Hoffa when he disappeared. Neither one.
Yeah.
And I knew them.
Well, Coast to Coast is making videos and helping research for videos about Jimmy Hoffa that are bogus truth.
It's just all lies.
Right. Right.
And he's never been found. But me, the guy who's his real family member, and I grew up with Kathy O'Brien and Dr. O'Brien and Chucky O'Brien.
Hmm.
Dr. O'Brien was a friend of mine. And then Roseanne Barr and Senator Graham, his family owns the news in Michigan that covered up the murder of my twin, my kidnap, and then they still lie to this day about Jimmy Hoffa.
Hmm.
I stopped the drug trade after I divorced that Westhouse family because they kept trying to murder me after they disappeared Hoffa. I moved a city away to Utica, Michigan, and I stopped that gun and drug trade run by the CIA and the Senate. And then they put me in jail for a year, and they made all the drug dealers Hollywood stars. That's when the world got Tom Hanks. And on Channel 4 with Graham, you have Help Me, Hank. And
Hmm.
Hank was the drug dealer I stopped. He was a real pharmacist, and he lived in a a house rented out behind my farmhouse on the same property. And
Yeah, pharmacists stealing drugs.
I got that property from Mazar, one of Trump's tax attorneys. Uh, it's really interesting how I stopped the drug trade, and then they turned all the drug dealers into stars.
You know, I read this week that now you had mentioned before that the Good Humor ice cream trucks were selling drugs there and at that property, and I read this week that Good Humor is now owned by China.
Yeah, I can believe that because that's where they were distributing the drugs they got for the guns they were selling.
Hmm.
And the dealers lived in the houses behind my farm. They were worker houses they all rented from Mazar. And they were running LSD and cocaine. When I got out of jail and came home, my kids were in my living room, and one of the drug dealers was bagging up LSD in baggies, uh, 1,000 hits in a bag, and they had a pile of bags on the kitchen table, and my kids were in the other room. So I stopped that drug trade again when I got out of jail, and then that woman stopped one of the drug dealers from shooting me. And then 2 days later, she tried to slit my throat. So I called the police and had the police take them out of my home. And this is in the book you just wrote.
Yeah, and you burned up all their drugs, I think, didn't you?
I burned them up, destroyed some, called the police, but the police were helping them sell them. So
Hmm.
was Hollywood.
Yeah,
And in Hollywood, you had Thelma and Louise, and I was Bottom Line Publishing, and they had already stolen Bottom Line, the line L. So
right,
you got the Elma and Louise Florence, who was with Hoffa when he disappeared,
right. Thelma,
and,
the L.
and
Yeah,
that
I
that
get it.
came out of Hollywood. And
Yeah,
then
the L, the line.
you got Tom Hanks and all these actors. The Mondays were funded by the Senate selling illegal guns to Mexican cartels and getting drugs in return.
Hmm.
And then they funded all the Hollywood movies. And
That's
years
why you have
earlier,
New Line Cinema and
yeah, and I'm the line. And
Dateline.
they, yeah, you have Dateline, Nightline. They fed off of my publishing company,
Mhm.
and they put bottom line in the dictionary uh, after I had Weiner and Associates had hired them to trademark the name. Weiner went off to New York with the Clintons and started exposing his private parts to little kids on the internet and went to jail for that. He was married to Aberdeen.
Right.
But I had hired that law firm to protect and make my trademark.
And they obviously didn't do it, which is why you got every news segment has a bottom line segment now.
Yeah, they stole my federal publishing license. And at that point, the US military should have stepped in and protected my license, but they never
Mhm.
did.
I
Instead,
noticed today that CBS has a Studio 57 segment
yeah,
marking the year of your rape, and
I'm sure they mark me and everything, but they won't admit I exist. And then I'm related to all the presidents on US money. So that's really funny. Like
mhm.
I grew up with Chase on a $10,000 bill. That's my family. And my great great grandfather was Jackson on the 20.
Mhm.
I went to school with Lincoln. Hamilton sold me my first car. You know what's interesting, Greg? How Huey Lewis and Billy Squier took my name as they stole my trademark worldwide. Then you got Huey Lewis come from France as Huey Lewis in the News, and Billy Squier came from Germany. Billy Squier worked for Queen. He was lead guitar player for Freddie Mercury, right?
Right.
And then back when they murdered my mother's family. Eisenhower put himself on the Mercury dime.
Hmm.
It's not coincidence because Eisenhower and Truman murdered my uncle Admiral Byrd
Mm-hmm.
as they murdered my mother's entire family and then stole the patents on buses, vans, the Fuller transmission. And my mother's family had built Hollywood. My family was people like Marilyn Monroe, the Baker family,
Mm-hmm.
the Byrd family, Fuller and Gardner, Ava Gardner, Frank Sinatra. These are my family members. And then all I asked my wife, who told me she was a witch a year after I married her, I only asked her to stop selling drugs. And she didn't need to because I was making $6,000 a day playing music in nightclubs. So there was no reason for her to be selling drugs other than she just wanted to provide all the bikers in Troy, Michigan with drugs. That's her whole reason for doing that.
Right.
And the police kept pulling me over. I got pulled over twice by a Mr. Robbins leaving my performances, and he had me open my trunk and pounds of marijuana in my trunk in the 1969, 1970. He did this twice. For one joint, my card partner, Dave Sinclair, who introduced the Beatles to Ed Sullivan, he went to jail for 30 years with my Uncle Gardner in Marquette State Prison for one
Mm-hmm.
marijuana joint back then.
Yeah. Yeah, they really could have put you away for a long time had they
Yeah, and
wanted to.
I had adopted and was raising and paying for 5 kids.
Yeah.
And this witch wouldn't stop selling drugs and using
Right.
my car with her brother to do it. And they ran the Renegades and the Outlaws.
Mm-hmm.
And the outlaw Whitey they introduced me to sold me the car, and that's why the FBI detained me for Hoffa's murder. And they introduced me to Whitey 2 months before Hoffa was disappeared. It gave him time to dig the hole to bury him in New Haven, Michigan.
Yeah.
And he's buried under G&G Auto. And there's a whole story in that too, Greg.
And now
G&G
good.
Auto is Lady Gaga.
Right.
Gaga. G&G Auto.
I get that.
Gaga.
Mm-hmm.
And in Rochester, Michigan, I had gone to kindergarten with the Locrecchio family, and that's Madonna's mafia family. And when my little brother married Donna Massey, the world got Madonna from Locrecchio.
Mm.
And then when they murdered my wives in Tennessee on the Civil War ranch I owned, the Locrecchio family came from California and Madonna and had the police SWAT team me and told me I had murdered Marie from Graceland. And Marie was alive and well, and I had had the police themselves pick her up from my home and put her on a bus to an airport with an airline ticket back to California. The police did that.
Mm-hmm.
And they still SWAT teamed me because the Locrecchio family had 17 relatives call from all over the country and say, I had just murdered Marie from Graceland. And the truth was they murdered Mary Tyler Moore's family. I grew up with Oscar Tyler Moore, and his girlfriend was thrown in a dumpster on the
Mm-hmm.
same day my wife had her ears cut off and her slope thread Halloween Eve. And he found her in a dumpster at Graceland. And Oscar Tyler Moore was my friend all my life.
Right.
And when I had asked the Westhouse family to quit selling drugs, the police SWAT teamed Oscar Tyler Moore's house, who lived about 2 blocks away from my house. And they never SWAT teamed me as I held off 3 police departments at my front door with the gun that really killed JFK. But nobody ever interviews me because the government's busy covering up the murder of the Oakland County child killings. And nobody knows that President Ford's, his own family member was murdered in Oakland County. Jimmy King was one of the last kids murdered.
Right.
And him and a little girl were kidnapped off of 7-Eleven on Gardner Street, and I'm Gardner.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
but they don't want the world to know that even President Ford's kid was murdered in Oakland County.
Right.
They never said it.
That's why they attacked President Ford.
So
Yeah.
we put all this in the book you just wrote about me.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote a 32 chapter book about my life, and you really researched it. My first wife was Nancy Lavoie, and Nancy had been raped by the Outlaws and the Renegades in Mount Clemens. They handcuffed her to a bed, and they were pulling a train on her in a Mount Clemens, Michigan hotel room and or motel room. And she escaped and went to the police and put several of them in jail. And then the Westhouse family, after I married Nancy because she became pregnant with my daughter, the Westhouse family started trying to have sex with me. The Cook family, which is the Westhouse cousins, and Apple Computer. And I'm Bill Gates' cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And my father-in-law, Nancy's father, Joe Jacobs, gave Gates the software to make his first computer as I married his daughter, Nancy. And Nancy was Joe Jacobs' stepdaughter. He had married Nancy's mother. After she divorced the mayor of East Detroit, Nancy's first father, when I met her. And that family's running to be president right now in 2024.
That's right. Yeah. Out of Florida.
From Miami. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't vote for any of them. I have 4 family members running to be president in the 2024 election, and nobody knows these things. I'm the only guy that knows this.
Right.
Nancy's family, my cousin, and then another cousin, and then another cousin. They're all running to be president. Because the news never admits I exist, and they've covered up the truth of Kennedy's murder and my relationship to that via Baker and Sirhan's family. Sirhan is my family. Camille Sirhan married my cousin, and they're still married, and they had kids together. And that was, I met Camille Sirhan 11 years before they framed Sirhan, and they framed Sirhan while his daughter married my cousin. And this is just all BS. The government's handed to public. And then Oswald was dating my Uncle Baker's wife. Miss Baker married into my family. And then she started cheating on him with Oswald.
Yeah.
And there's no lies in these things. Marilyn Monroe is my cousin because her real last name is Baker. And you know, Gardner's mother was Mrs. Baker.
And Baker's always working for the government doing investigations, so it makes sense why she was always reporting to Hoover.
Yeah. She lives with the family that kidnapped me when I was 4 and murdered my twin. That's her friend.
Baker started the FBI, for heaven's sakes. They go all the way back to at least Lafayette Baker, who investigated Lincoln's assassination.
That was my family, my real family.
Right.
Not the people who married into it.
Right. Right.
And then Marilyn Monroe, she was having sex with Bobby and John F. Kennedy, spying on them both for Hoover, as I lived on Hoover Street. And they murdered Admiral Byrd. And then gave the world a fake diary that's still hidden on the Ancient Aliens channel.
Right. That's why they're always talking about that crap on there.
And if I call into Coast to Coast and say the truth, they laugh at me.
Yeah. And even Coast to Coast was started by a bowling alley where you used to play a bar, right. And a bar where you used to play for Bottom
Premier
Line.
Networks, yeah. And then you got Art Bell, and Art Mothersbaugh was my father-in-law. And then you got Danny DeVito, because Vi Mothersbaugh was married to my brother. And then you got Rush Limbaugh, who murdered Vi's kid selling them drugs, who was a big Trump fan. And Trump, his tax attorney, sold me the Senate gun and drug trade run by the CIA that the world knows as Noriega and Fast and Furious. I lived these things and owned the properties they were running the drugs on.
This is why all the bikers instinctively, or maybe
Bikers,
from the top,
the
all support
bikers and the
Trump.
police run the drugs. The police help them do it.
Hmm.
And I don't think this, I know this. That's why they put me in jail for a year and made movie stars out of all the bikers.
Right,
When I divorced the family that ran the Renegades, you got the Renegades on TV the following year.
right.
They took my place as they stole my trademark. Bottom line.
That's why they were calling Obama the renegade. The Secret Service, their code word for him was the renegade.
It's just amazing what they've done in my life. And they've stolen over $3 trillion from my family. And then they murdered my whole family 5 times.
Right. And now I suspect that biker gangs possibly have had something to do with Fleming's disappearance as well.
Oh, yeah, I'm certain of that. It all fits into my life. And even the biker who changed his name, he hangs out with the outlaws, doesn't he?
Yeah, he seems to have family members that are outlaws. Yeah.
And then he came on the video you and I made about the Wizard of Oz and Fleming kid being disappeared.
Yeah, it wasn't on our video, but he was talking about it in somebody's Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah, he said I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And the whole disappearance is just like Jimmy Hoffa being my family member, because Mac Osborne's family kidnapped me in '57 before they murdered JFK. Long, Wallace, Osborne, Graham, all these senators, Anderson, Andrews, they were all governors, and they had me kidnapped and tortured and murdered my twin. And then they all became newscasters on all the major media stations. And they all ignore my existence. And I'm the kid whose identical twin was murdered and brought from California with Camille Sirhan 11 years prior.
Right.
And all of them, including Senator Graham, pretend I don't exist.
So we wrote Sirhan some letters in prison, and also Kennedy there some letters asking him what was going on with this connection between Sirhan and Camille Sirhan. And of course, then neither of them wrote back. But right after we wrote the letter, Kennedy goes down to visit Sirhan in prison there, and the next thing you know, he's running for president. There's no way this is coincidence.
No, I know. And they'll never answer you.
No.
They disappeared me when they stole $3 trillion in a federal license from me. I had federal FCC licenses to run TV stations, and I had a federal publishing license at ASCAP and BMI. They even stole my name and my IRS licenses, Greg. And they used my federal licenses all over the globe in 264 countries.
Yeah, yeah. Seems to indicate that.
As they stole my tax license and name. And
Right.
it was Americans who did this, not Muslims.
Right, right. And this seems to indicate that Sirhan and Kennedy have some sort of deal going on or something. I don't know what it was exactly, or couldn't guess, but they do seem to be collaborating in
Kennedy's
some way.
son, I don't think I knew his parents, and
His
they were
nephew,
very
yeah.
intelligent.
Hmm.
And I don't think he's had a third of the education like John F. Kennedy or Bobby Kennedy had. They were very
Right.
intelligent people. After they were murdered, he probably got shuffled around and didn't get a good education.
Right.
But I'm the truth of 5 Kennedy family murders. I was talking to all of them as they were murdered, and they were talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody pretends I don't exist. I left Michigan because of Senator Graham, his family, and Billy Graham, and the Baptists who kidnapped me and murdered my twin, and my own family. One of my older brothers raped my wife in front of our children. I didn't want to stay in Michigan anymore. I left there 45 years ago. And I've kept all this stuff inside of me
Mm-hmm.
for 70 years. And then those same gays that kidnapped me and tortured me and murdered my twin and murdered my mother's family, they came back and murdered 4 of my wives after I murdered the Westhouse family and Mrs. Florence, who was with Hoffa when he disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And they were nothing more than witches and drug dealers.
Yeah.
Who entered my life because they hated my first wife, Nancy Lavoie, because she put their biker friends in prison for raping her. They formed a line and were raping her in a motel room in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And
Yeah.
she was the mayor of East Detroit's daughter. This was no little thing.
Right.
They sent the Cook family. She married my brother-in-law, Nancy's brother, who was running Fort Knox as a captain. He was a captain there and a DI for about 4 years. And his brother did the same thing as a lieutenant. And the Cook family married Tony and then came directly to me and asked me for sex. And that was the Westhouse and the Florence family that murdered Hoffa. And they did this because they hated Nancy, who had put the bikers from the Outlaws and the Renegades in prison.
Mm-hmm.
As her father was mayor of East Detroit, who gave you people like Ted Nugent, Iggy Pop, the B-52s, Alice Cooper, that they all lived in East Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Around my wife.
Eminem.
Yeah, around my wife. Eminem moved into the house of the detective that was supposed to protect me, and then started having sex with my wife in front of my newborn daughter a week after I married her.
Yeah, a little trailer, right?
Yeah, Eminem took over the trailer when he died. And this is all sponsored by the police department in Warren, Michigan and Oakland County.
Yeah, he even called his album 8 Mile, the road that you were born on.
That's where I was born, 8 Mile and Outer Drive, Holy Cross Hospital. Yeah, this is the same police detective that was supposed to protect me when 2 people attempted to murder me. Instead of protecting me, he started banging my new wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked in and he was talking her into having sex as I walked in my own house. I had come home from work early. And they weren't expecting me in the house. And he talked her into having sex with them while they thought I was gone. I walked in on it, watched the whole thing. And it was right in front of my little daughter in a high chair. She was about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years old at that time. She had the baby before we were married. And then she went and lived with this police detective for 2 weeks. And then she came back and told me she was pregnant again. And she named that kid with my name.
Right.
I've never believed that kid with my name is my son. He had curly hair and I don't have curly hair.
But the detective probably did.
Yeah, his brothers and mother did.
Right.
And then it's funny, Nancy kept asking me to take her back. She married into the Bowe family. And the day she married Lavoy, she came and had sex with me for 7 hours. And then on her way out the door, she asked me to marry her. And I said, no, I'm not coming back to you. Because she had tried to kill me. She
Right.
come running up behind me with a butcher knife and tried to stab me in the back. So I told her no.
Well, not try. She did stab you in the back, didn't she? Didn't she succeed?
Uh, and after she stabbed me, she called the police and told the police I was beating her up, and none of that was true.
Right.
Um, and I just walked out of the house. I left her a car and the whole house and the kids, and I divorced her. I never
Yeah.
turned her into the police because I knew she was half crazy because she was the first heart transplant on earth in New York when she was a day old.
Yeah. And
She
she had
just,
had mental problems. She was kleptomaniac and
yeah,
seemed to have all
she,
kinds of mental issues.
because she was the first heart transplant, she had scars across her chest, and they had dislocated her shoulders to put the new heart in that they built. It was a mechanical heart. It wasn't a real heart.
Yeah.
And she was a day old when they did that. Her mother had had German measles in New York, and her mother's obstetrician who delivered her designed a heart for her and put it in her chest. She's actually in the medical history books, that wife.
Mm-hmm.
And she lived to be in her 60s. She just recently died when the FBI shot Lavoy Finicum. They had cut Nancy's leg off and murdered her. And Nancy, before they cut her leg off, and a doctor from the Renegades and Outlaws talked her into removing her leg. She didn't
Mm-hmm.
need her leg removed. And she had asked me to marry her again. And she had asked me to marry her 5 or 6 times over the years. And I would never take her back because she attempted to murder me.
Right.
And it was all this story in her head she built up when I walked in and she was with the police detective having sex. And she built up that I was cheating on her and I hadn't
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Her mental illness was changing
Right.
everything around. Right.
And that mental illness was because she was deprived oxygen to her brain when they cut her chest open and took her heart out.
Right.
And
Right.
I always knew this. She was on the borderline of being mentally unstable because of retardation. And I always knew
Right.
this. She had raped me when she was 21 and I was 15. That's why she was pregnant with my daughter.
Right.
Her mother, who was married to the mayor of East Detroit, came over to my family's home and told my parents that I raped her, and that wasn't true. She raped me
Right. And
outside
then to
our
keep
mother.
her from killing the baby, you decided to marry her and take responsibility for
She
the
asked
baby,
me
even
for
though she
money.
raped you and you were only 15.
Right. She asked me for money to abort the kid. And I said, no,
Right.
that's my kid. I don't believe in abortion. And I married her.
Right.
And then a week later, she was the detective that was supposed to be protecting me from people attempting to murder me, started having sex with her in front of my daughter.
Yeah.
And then my own church wouldn't marry me because she was so much older than me. They wanted
Mhm.
me to file rape charges against her. And I said, no, she has my kid. If I do that, she'll kill the kid. So I married her. And I married her in a Baptist church.
Yeah.
And then that Baptist church I married her in, they turned on me. And the witch that attacked me, my second wife was 12 years older than me. And her cousin was 12 years older than me, the Cook family. And her mother was 50 when I was 15. They were all trying to have sex with me, Greg. because they
Mhm.
hated my first wife that much because she put the bikers in jail.
After they had raped her, right?
Right, right, exactly. And I was too young to know all of these things.
Right.
I learned this looking back,
Mhm.
50
Mhm.
years later. I looked into all these things.
Yeah.
And that family that married me, they married me for money. The first thing they did was I was performing in lounges. They used me to do operations on their children's feet. And because they were doing LSD as witches, their kids were born with webbed feet. All their toes were together. So I paid 10,000 a kid to get their toes opened up.
Wow.
They used me for things like that, Greg.
Right.
And then they continued selling dope for the Outlaws and the Renegades. And then they murdered Hoffa. And they had the real gun that murdered Kennedy. And these were witches and Apache Indians and Italians. And the FBI will tell you to this day, the mafia killed Hoffa. Well, I was married to them.
Well, I know you're talking more about your wives at the moment, but when you say something about the gun that killed Kennedy, that's going to have a lot of people asking, how does he know that? And do you want to say anything about that gun there at all? About
They
how
told
you
me
know
it
it
was.
was?
The witch told me it was.
Yeah.
And all that told me was they were still murdering the kids in Oakland County and throwing the bodies in the ditches in front of our homes.
Mhm.
And one of those kids is Timmy King. President Ford's real name is Gardner and King, and I'm
Mhm.
Gardner and King. Those are my family
Right.
members.
Right.
Terry Heath, they murdered Terry Heath. She created the Head Start program. She was Ronald Reagan's role model for Head Start. She ran a Head Start CPS office in Wisconsin on the Great Lakes where they would kidnap me and try to fly me out to gays in California and sell me for sex at the age of
Mhm.
3 and 4.
Yeah.
And I know these things firsthand.
Mhm.
2 policemen broke into her office while off duty, kidnapped her out of her CPS Head Start Pro office while she was protecting kids on the Great Lakes. They were making porno movies with.
Right.
She called me from 5 states away and asked me to help her. I bought her a farm, moved her to it, and then they caught up with her 6 months later and murdered her. And then they wrote suicide on her death certificate. And I couldn't say nothing because her family showed up and had her murdered. They took her off of life support. She didn't die after I gave her CPR and found her hanging.
Mhm.
I took her to a hospital. She was still alive 35 days later. Her own sister and daughter had her murdered with a
Mhm.
drug overdose. And the nurses at the hospital came and knocked on my door, and they were really mad because there was nothing wrong with her brain activity. She was getting better every day, and her own family murdered her after the police hung her in her dog's leash. And they've made movies about these things. My wife, Victoria, and Terry, they were murdered, and then they made movies about it.
Mhm. Very clear about, even in the movie, about how they
And
were
this is
killed
because
and
I stopped the
replicating how it
illegal.
was done.
This is because I stopped the illegal Senate gun and drug trade. And every senator and all the House of Representative people, they all knew me all my life. I
Right.
have letters from all of them. And you put some of those letters in your book, I think.
Yeah. All the way up until 9/11, and then
Yeah, 5 minutes after 9/11, none of them knew me.
Mhm.
And then they told the world Muslims blew up the Twin Towers when it was America, London, and Israel who did that.
Right.
That was a big cover up. From George Bush, who was making Nazi uniforms throughout World War II, right where I lived in Greenville, Tennessee. He made Hitler's parachutes and army uniforms.
Right.
The Bush family, they were Nazis.
Right. I
America,
find that fascinating that when Dr. Oz was running for Senate, that he posed next to Hitler's car down there in Greenville.
yeah, Greenville, Tennessee. That's right. And the Bush family put it there because they were making parachutes and uniforms for Hitler.
Right.
In the whole town of Greenville, the majority of them are Germans, and they all worked in the factories making Hitler's uniforms and parachutes throughout World War II, all the way through World War II.
Right.
And they
Isn't that
covered
amazing?
all this up as they ran in various offices. And then America made him president.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
So it's not surprising that Bush would say your name on 9/11 when he says
No, he
Hugh's
knows my
towers
family.
are
My family,
collapsing.
my father's family is part German from Berlin, but they migrated here in the 16 and 1700s. My original name was Schwartz. In Germany, Schwartz invented TNT in the 12th century. It's in history. It's in German history books, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah.
When my father's family moved here, the dock worker didn't know how to speak German, and they were blacksmiths. So they got off the boat, and he put down Squire because a squire is a blacksmith.
Right.
Squire and Schwartz mean the same thing, blacksmith. My family's name from Germany went from Schwartz to Squire. And that's why they gave you Billy Squire from Germany, as they stole my trademark with Huey Lewis.
Right.
And Eisenhower had already murdered Byrd with Truman because he confronted them about the same drug trade I confronted Noriega and the FBI and the CIA with.
So
And
you're
when
always talking about the Germans and the French attacked you, and I know your family knew the French underground as well as the
the
Germans.
French underground was my father's best friend. My
Right.
father fought on the U.S. side. My father had 18 brothers. 11 of them died in World War II fighting their own family, their own cousins.
Right.
They fought on America's side. They had moved here a long time before World War II. They had moved here before World War One. Schwartz Video in New York gave the entire world silent movies. People like Charlie Chaplin, W.C. Fields, and then my mother's family was Ava Gardner's family, Frank Sinatra. Schwartz
Right.
Video married my mother. My mother, her family made Hollywood. There's no lie in this. And they still sell my mother's properties and tax it to her dead body. A tax assessor who's married to a man does that in California right now.
So the Yoda in Spaceballs says never underestimate the power of the Schwartz.
Yeah, he was talking about Schwartz Video, New York. That's what they were talking about. And then who played the main character in Star Wars? Harrison Ford, and I'm Harris and Ford. My family ran Ford's mansion. When I stopped the drugs, they were selling them at Ford's and Chevy and Chrysler. Lee Iacocca, his son-in-law, lived next door to me. His son-in-law was selling the drugs with Hank. You go to Detroit, Channel 4 News, run by the Graham family, and Barr, who gave you Epstein in Manhattan. That's the Barr family.
Yeah.
You go to
Barr and
Channel
Graham.
4 in Detroit, and the number one newscaster who supposedly helps the people he sells drugs to is Help Me Hank.
Right. And there they are right there with Osborne, Marie Osborne,
Right.
the family of the rapist back in 1957
and
from the very beginning.
They're the CEO of Graham Media.
Right.
And who's Graham? That's Trump's best friend. And where did I buy the farm? From Trump's tax attorney.
Yeah, Barr's the CEO of media, and then Barr gave.
There's his relationship to all the bikers, the Renegades, the Outlaws, the Hells Angels. Right. The family I married ran them. And he was an ex-state policeman. He got fired because he murdered a guy.
Right. And Attorney General Barr gave the world Epstein when his father, hired
Right, and Roseanne Barr and her
Jeffrey
mother,
Epstein as a teacher and put him in front of
Roseanne
kids.
Barr's family lived in Oakland County down the street from me. I grew up with them.
Same Barr family.
And
They
then
even look alike.
they've hidden me my
Mhm.
entire life. And then who did
Yeah.
Trump give you as Attorney General? He gave you Barr because he already knew Barr was hiding me
Right.
with Graham.
Right.
Graham and Trump worked together, gave you Barr, who gave the world Epstein,
Mhm.
gave
And
him
that
access.
also would keep him from being exposed from his own connections with Epstein.
Right, right. And then they murdered. They put him in jail and they murdered him.
Mhm.
You can't prove they murdered him, but they murdered him.
Obviously. I think most of the world knows
He
that.
was supplying little kids from Manhattan to the King of England.
Right.
They murdered him. And these are the same people that kidnapped me. The Osborne comes from London. Osborne was governor of Michigan. He always ran to be governor against my family, Baldwin.
Mhm.
And then that's a whole nother story. Rusty Killen murdered Brian Baldwin, who was married to my sister. And then he told me he was going to come and get me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was before Alec Baldwin, on the scene of on the Rust movie, shot his director.
Yeah.
And the gun was handed him to the people that kidnapped me at 4. And the Baldwin family is my family.
Yeah.
I saved Sue Baldwin when I was 15 from the same bikers that raped my wife Nancy. They were going to do the same thing to her. Sue Baldwin. And nobody knows these things other than me and Sue Baldwin. And I don't even know if she's still alive. I never married her. We used to do our homework together at Warren High. And at
Mhm.
Warren High, that Webster funded my school system, Warren Consolidated. And when they stole my trademark, DuPont and Claire Cummins, Milky the Clown, stole my trademark where my father built milk trucks on the day they murdered Admiral Byrd, cut my father's hands off. They kidnapped me and my twin, murdered my twin. And then 11 years later at Warren High School, where I was a teacher, they stole my trademark and Webster put it in his dictionary that day, the day they stole it. And they used it in every country on earth, and it was a federal publishing license. It came from Foley Federal Court. And then after 9/11, they told the world that Mr. Foley was beheaded, making fun of what they did to me.
Mhm.
And George Bush said all of these things.
Right. And then put Mick Foley
The
in the
Nazi,
WWF. Yeah.
the Nazi making Hitler uniforms throughout World War II in Greenville, Tennessee.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. And then look at what Musk has just done to the car industry.
Yeah, that was something I was hoping you'd mentioned today. I've been reading about that some of the emails you sent me.
He told them to lie about how much mileage they could get. And if
Yeah.
all of us had an electric car, they can't supply the electricity for it.
I know.
And now we're here where I live. The whole West Coast, they made it mandatory. I have to buy an electric car, and I won't. I'll move. There's a reason.
Right.
There's a reason they went to gasoline and steam engines. They had electric cars a long time ago in the 1800s. Musk didn't design them. This
That's
is no
right.
lie.
That's right. And the
Everything
ones
about
that he
Musk,
designs, they don't work
everything
and they
about the
catch on
German from
fire.
everything about the German from South Africa. That's where all the Nazis lived, Greg.
Right.
Everything about these Nazis from Germany, South Africa, they're destroying our country.
And that's why Putin's really our ally still to this day. He's the one fighting people like this, and we're electing him president
He
and
wasn't your ally.
giving him NASA.
If Russia hadn't been your ally for the last 250, 300 years, he would have already nuked you.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. And you know, my family made America, and you know this. It's in your book.
Yeah.
George Washington gave my family his sword in the first Mason's Lodge, and they were using the Mason Lodge to plan the war against King George in 1776.
Mhm.
The lodges were already there, built. They infiltrated them and used them to plan the war against London to
Right.
become a free nation of America.
Right.
Uh, and Americans are too naive to know this. They weren't taught this, so they don't know it. I
Mm.
know it because I'm the founding families. I'm related to King James. He gave you the King James Bible. I'm related to Schofield. He gave you the Living Bible. I'm related to Smith. They gave you the Mormon Bible. My family gave you 3 Bibles.
Mhm.
And you know this, Greg.
They must have really wanted you for president because, I mean, that number 47 is so wrapped up in our history. And then,
The
then we had the
two
4th of
corporations,
July, and you're born on the 4th of July.
2 corporations told me they would back me if I'd run to be president. Any one of my father's brothers after World War II could have been your president. We're not educated enough to do that job, and we know it. So we didn't do it. We told the corporations no.
Mhm.
They would have used us for their own agenda. And
Yeah.
we're not that, we have a lot of common sense. We know who they are, especially after they murdered my mother's entire family for money. They
Right.
murdered my mother's entire family leaving church. The only reason my mother lived is because she got thrown out of the car on fire and landed in a ditch full of water. Her
Yeah.
mother and all her brother and all her sisters were murdered leaving church. And then the kids they missed, they went back and ran them over in their driveways. And then they stole Hollywood property and patents from them, from the Fuller
Mhm.
family
Right. So you understood this
all
to,
my life.
yeah. And you didn't want to
And I
cozy up
walked
next to
away
these
from
people and
I
get into
walked away
politics
from
with them.
all of this. I kept my
Right.
mouth shut. I went about my own life, got married, and then they murdered my wives 4 times.
Right.
They murdered 5 of my kids. As I sat in an Oakland County prosecutor's office, they murdered 5 more of my kids as I sat in Al Brooks Patterson's office.
Right.
Not one of them is written up as a murder.
Right.
And they
Right.
were all murdered on the same day. It's
Mm.
unbelievable how the police deal drugs and cover up murders. My
Right.
2 of my wives, the police in Greenville and in Johnson City, Tennessee, told me we're not going to file murder charges. We're going to leave these murders up to God. That's so illegal. It's pathetic. They don't even do their jobs. And then the whole police force in Greenville, Tennessee, was put in jail for dealing drugs 3 years later. And I didn't do that. I was already living out in California, a whole different state. Didn't know nothing about it. Turned around and there's the whole police force that used fake names and badge numbers in 2 of my wife's murders,
Mhm.
all in jail for dealing drugs. And gee,
And the
what did
lead
I do?
detective never existed.
I stopped the Senate gun and drug trade.
Right.
The police paid me back as hitmen, working for Obama and Clinton and Joe Biden. And you know this is truth, Greg. And even Trump sold me the property the illegal guns and drugs were being sold on. And
Mm.
then Ron Paul's family, Paul was my business manager, and he sold me out to the Russian mafia in New York. De Blasio. De Blasio was my good friend. He was Italian, born in Brooklyn, New York. He was my bass player at Bottom Line. He died of a heart attack, and you got a Russian man went right to Brooklyn court, changed his name to his name, my bass player's name,
Uh-huh.
and ran behind Giuliani to become mayor of New York,
Mm.
right? And there's no lie in this.
Right. I get it.
So all 3 parties are corrupt. They murder my family and steal my life and murder little kids for money. and then they pretend I don't exist. And that's why we make these videos.
Mhm.
Have you gotten anywhere in Gretchen's murder?
Well, we've done a lot of searches, and we found some bones in a few places, and gave those to the detective. Gave your book to the detective. The bones turned out to be animal bones. One was a fish bone. The other, he didn't never told me what it was, so I just assumed. I was pretty sure it was a dog bone to begin with. So, um, but that's as far as we've gotten.
In Ohio, they covered me up with the National Guard, the same as they covered up my two wives. And the Womack family did that. Florence Westhouse, the family that buried Hoffa, they were friends with Flores and Womack, and they're all in the Senate and the House. And they were dealing drugs with Graham and Trump and the rest of them.
Well, I'm leaning towards believing that bikers and police are working together on
Right,
this somehow.
exactly. The state policeman that buried Hoffa, he held all the biker meetings on his farm in New Haven, Michigan. Hell's Angel, Hell's Our Home, Outlaws, Renegades,
Yeah,
Penetrators. They all met on his farm where they buried Hoffa under
mhm,
Gaga, G&G.
right, right.
And he's been buried there for 50 years under my horse and a goat.
Now,
And
one of the
nobody
bikers,
will admit I exist. And then the drug dealers I stopped, they've tried nonstop to murder me dozens of times, and I keep living. I outlived the hits.
one of the bikers around here was tried and acquitted of murdering another woman a number of years ago, right in the same area. And
Yeah, and then who was the main suspect was another cop.
yeah,
And we
yeah, the
don't need to
person of
name his
interest was a
name.
policeman,
And then
right?
he showed up and said that it has nothing to do with my life, but I was kidnapped by Osborne. They gave the world the Wizard of Oz. And then
And the
Fleming wrote,
Wizard of Oz is all about the gays and the gay agenda.
right,
Uh,
and Fleming,
that's what that whole show's about.
Ian Fleming wrote the book. It has everything to do with my life and
Hmm.
the government hiding
Everything.
the real killers of JFK and Hoffa and even
I had a
9/11.
whole bunch about the Wizard of Oz in the book before this murder.
Oh, well, Frank L. Baum directed the movie. Who stole my business from me? Frank and Westfall. And you already know Westfall because the police, right where they murdered Fleming, they took your wife's car to Westfall, and Westfall stole my publishing license with
Right,
Frank.
right, right.
It all has to do with my life. Frank L. Baum directed The Wizard of Oz. That's not coincidence, Greg, but the police will always tell you, oh, it's just coincidence.
And Victor Fleming made the movie, right?
Mm-hmm. Vic Fleming. Oh, and who'd they murder on Halloween? My wife. Vic.
And because we were just talking about this, they came
Yeah.
out with a new story about Fleming in a book
And her name
today.
was Vic too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Did you? Yeah.
she was
You
Mel.
actually you sent me the email about the Fleming and taking stuff out of the book. Mm.
Yeah. And my life is just so full of this stuff because my family made Hollywood and
Right.
we own the biggest video distribution company on earth in New York. And because I was an ASCAP BMI publisher, and not a single person I publish has stepped forward and even attempted to help me. And they all know I'm telling truth.
Mhm.
I grew up. Ted Nugent's mother took me to the MC5 wedding, but I don't exist. He goes on Alex Jones all the time, and he ignores my truth. He lived in East Detroit, and my wife's family made him a rock and roll star.
What is MC5, Hugh? I don't know what that is.
That was another rock and roll group.
Oh, okay.
They wrote a song, Kick Out the Jams, MFers.
Hmm.
It was played on the radio in the 60s and 70s.
I just noticed all the
Ted
motorcycle
Nugent's
clubs put
mother,
MC for
Ted
motorcycle club.
Nugent's mother took me to the MC5 wedding. There's no lying.
Interesting.
And I was
Interesting.
bottom line on the radio when she did,
Right.
but they don't know me. And
Right.
then I became even his publisher. I got an ASCAP federal publishing license. And then they gave you U2 and all these songs that marked my life and even took my name with Huey Lewis and Billy Squier coming from Germany.
All the motorcycle clubs put, like Hell's Angels MC motorcycle club, Outlaws MC motorcycle club. And you say
Right.
MC5, and I suspect that's talking about a motorcycle
Yeah,
club too.
they're all bikers, Greg. All of them.
Right. Right.
All the rockers were biker. I grew up playing at Mustang Acres. That's where all the bikers meet in Brighton, Michigan.
Right.
Every place I played, the bikers were where I played. That's why my second wife, was dealing drugs. She was supplying the bikers with drugs. I'm not stupid. Her father and brother were part of the bikers. Her father was a state policeman. That's who buried Jimmy Hoffa. And I don't think these things, Greg. I know it. And that's where you got Madonna from, as my brother married Donna Massey. My family is in the Smithsonian with tractors. Massey Ferguson was my family, Harris and Massey. And this has nothing to do with Kamala Harris. Right. I'm 100% European. My mother's only brother was murdered when he was 12 years old. He didn't have any kids. This has nothing to do with Kamala Harris. She's not my family.
Right.
Kamala Harris, her own father wrote a book at a college in California and said the Harris family in Africa, who took the Harris name here in America, were selling slaves. They were selling their own cousins from tribes in Africa. That's who Kamala Harris is.
Right.
And then she wants you and me to pay reparations for what her family did. And she's from Indonesia and Africa.
Her family and Biden's family.
Yeah. I don't think so. I'm not going to pay reparations to something I had nothing to do with. Clara Harris is my family. She was with Lincoln fighting the slave trade.
Right.
I'm not going to pay reparations to something I fought.
Right.
My family died fighting those people like Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
Biden has taken all my family names after they murdered my family. And then he goes on national TV and says, no, he isn't doing that. Bullshit. He even appointed Jackson as a Supreme Court justice. I'm the Jackson family on the 20.
I'm noticing that the people that enslaved the slaves are also now trying. They're actually a lot of homosexuals, and now they're tying the homosexuals to the black movement, so that you get like the Rainbow Push Coalition.
Yeah, BLM, the Bundys with BLM. That's my stolen trademark. Bottom Line Music. That's my trademark. And then the entire lawyers bar in California used Bottom Line to study out of for the past 50 years after they stole my trademark. And entertainment attorneys did that to me. People like Weiner and Sandowski and Alan Pepper. They were attorneys. They stole my trademark and my federal license and my name with Howard Stern in New York and the Barr family in New York and Epstein in New York. I was ASCAP New York from Foley Federal Court. They stole 28,000 worldwide entertainment contracts with my name and my IRS federal tax license. And they put it in every country on earth. As they murdered my family 5 times.
No, I think a lot of these people years ago were the people that ran the slave trade.
Greg, $3 trillion in theft.
Mm-hmm.
And the presidents helped them do it. You understand?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I lived next door to Lee Iacocca and John DeLorean, and my family owned the patent for the vans at Chevrolet.
Right.
You understand all this? We own the patents for the buses. And
Right.
these people became billionaires murdering my family. And I'm never going to shut up. And why do none of them ever take me to court, Greg? It's
Because if they did, all that information would come out.
True.
Right. They don't want it to come out at all.
Yeah. And before I die, you need to take all my records, because when they start attacking you over your book, you'll have the records to prove everything I said was true.
Mhm.
We can end this here unless you got something to add.
Well, my last thought there was just that a lot of this is the homosexual agenda, and I think homosexuals, in large part, were slave owners because a lot of them were having sex with their slaves.
The gays that murdered my mother's family over Hollywood, they're still selling the property. The
Yeah.
tax assessor is from Michigan State University. He's married to a man. They're
Right.
gays, and they're
Hmm.
still taxing the property they sell to my mother's dead body.
That's what Over the Rainbow and Dorothy is, because the homosexuals used to ask,
Five
"Are
gay
you a
governors,
friend of Dorothy?" You know, to identify
five
each
gay
other.
governors kidnapped me and murdered my twin when we were 4 with Camille
Right.
Sirhan.
Right. Right.
Wallace, Long, Osborne, Daryl Hall, Nick Andrews, and Anderson. These were all gay people. They kidnapped me right out of my public school and tortured and raped me and murdered my twin
Hmm.
with Camille Sirhan. Then they murdered the Duncan kids who lived next door to my family's farm with arsenic. They murdered them all on the same day they murdered Kennedy. Johnson called my family's home about the 5 Duncan dead kids as he took office.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
who did Jackie Kennedy ran to honest sis as they were sticking their male appendages into my body. You understand this, Greg? This is not
Very much an attack by the homosexual agenda,
Yeah, and
right?
then who's Ancient Aliens? Georgios Tsoukalos from Greece. Who
Mhm.
did Jackie run to? A Greece shipping magnate,
Right. Honest is right.
Onassis. And who killed Jackie? DuPont, the same people that stole my trademark and gave you the WWF.
Right. Through their
Bot- and
thoroughbred
bottom line
horses.
events. And they've
Right.
hidden me in all media for 70 years now. And my family was with Lincoln in Ford Theater as Booth shot him. So they
Mhm.
murdered 5 Kennedys and they murdered Lincoln, and it's all related to me, but I don't exist. And Hoffa's my family member, and the FBI detained me before anybody, and I don't exist. As my mother-in-law was with Hoffa. And
Well, now we brought it back full circle, so that's probably a
yeah,
good place to
my
end.
mother-in-law had nothing at all to do with the trucking industry, and Hoffa was married. And
Mhm.
Hoffa is my family member. So are the Kennedys. And so was
Yeah.
Jackie Onassis.
Right.
They're my cousins. My
Awfully
family,
important to share this,
my
everybody, if you're
family
listening.
created America, and you know this, Greg.
Yeah. Think about how important that is. Share this video, everybody.
They won't. They're too naive. They think I'm a liar.
Well, good night to you.
Hopefully somebody will share it. Bye.
Bye.